Right in the middle of my brother's wedding, I stood up, raised my glass, and said aloud, "I used to be the groom's sister. But today, I'm a stranger, because I chose to become a mother." The entire ballroom fell silent. My name is Claire Johnson. I used to be the perfect daughter in my family's eyes. Good grades, a stable career, a marriage that checked all the boxes. But then I got divorced. Then I got pregnant. And from that moment on, I was no longer a Johnson. I'm a single mother to a little girl named Lily. She's the light of my life, the reason I never gave up. But because of her, I was pushed beyond the lines of a family I once believed would love me unconditionally. Have you ever been turned away by your own flesh and blood just because you didn't follow the path they laid out for you? Stay with me, because the story I'm about to tell isn't just about a wedding or a speech that shook a room. It's about standing up, protecting your child, and rewriting what the word family truly means. The phone rang at 7:32 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was kneeling beside Lily's bathtub, my sleeves rolled up past my elbows, shampooing her fine blonde hair into a sudsy crown. "Can you get that, Mommy? It might be Grandma," Lily chirped, flicking bubbles toward the ceiling. My stomach tightened at her innocent hope. My mother hadn't called in 3 months. I dried one hand against my jeans and reached for my phone. "Claire, it's your mother." Her voice carried that familiar, crisp edge, the one I'd spent my childhood trying to soften with perfect grades and pressed dresses. "Matthew is engaged to Rebecca Porter. You remember the Porters, don't you? Judge Porter's daughter." I drew a measured breath. "That's wonderful. Tell him congratulations from me." "Of course," my mother continued. "The wedding will be at the Lakeside Country Club. We've reserved the main ballroom. Everyone who matters in Austin will be there." Water splashed as Lily tried to catch my attention, proudly showing me how she could make her rubber duck dive underwater. I smiled at her, but my focus remained on my mother's words. "The ceremony will be quite formal," she continued, her voice dropping slightly. "Traditional, sophisticated." I knew what was coming next. "It would be best if Lily didn't attend, dear. You understand, don't you?" My free hand gripped the edge of the porcelain tub so hard my knuckles turned white. 5 years since I'd become a single mother. 5 years of sideways glances and careful omissions from my family. "No, Mom, I don't understand." "Claire," she sighed, as if I were still 10 years old, refusing to wear my Sunday dress. "This isn't about you. It's Matthew's day. The Porters are very particular about appearances." I watched Lily splash, oblivious to the conversation that was erasing her existence. My beautiful girl, with eyes like mine and a dimple in her left cheek, just like her father's. A man who had walked away before she'd even drawn her first breath. "I'll think about it," I lied, knowing already what my answer would be. After hanging up, I focused on finishing Lily's bath, wrapping her in a fluffy towel, and helping her into pajamas with dancing unicorns. As I tucked her in, she asked, "Was that really Grandma? Does she want to see me?" I smoothed her damp hair back from her forehead. "Not tonight, sweetie. But you know what? Tomorrow we're going to the park, just you and me." After she fell asleep, I sat at my kitchen table, grading third-grade spelling tests by lamplight, red pen marking errors with mechanical precision while tears blurred my vision. The Johnson family had a reputation to uphold in Austin society, and a 35-year-old divorced daughter with a situation wasn't part of the carefully curated image. In our family photo albums, Matthew's accomplishments filled page after page. Academic awards, football trophies, law school graduation. My pages had grown sparse after my divorce, and since Lily, they'd gone completely blank. The invitation arrived 3 weeks later in a thick cream envelope with gold embossing. I ran my finger over the raised lettering before opening it. "Mr. and Mrs. Edward Johnson request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their son Matthew Edward Johnson to Rebecca Ann Porter." My eyes immediately went to the recipient line. Claire Johnson. Just me. "No, and daughter, or and guest, or and family. No Lily. I set the invitation on the counter and stared at it while making Lily's lunch. Peanut butter with the crusts cut off, apple slices arranged in a smile, a note with a heart drawn beside my name. The ordinary motions of motherhood felt suddenly radical, an act of defiance against the family that wanted to pretend this part of my life didn't exist. That night, I called my mother. "The invitation only has my name on it," I said without preamble. "Yes," she replied carefully. "That's correct." "Lily is 5 years old, Mom. She's your granddaughter." The silence stretched between us like a physical thing. "Claire," my mother finally said, her voice gentle in that devastating way she reserved for delivering blows. "You know this is a formal occasion. People will ask questions." "What questions? She's my daughter. She's not part of the family picture we're presenting. People will wonder who she belongs to." The words hit me like a physical blow. Who she belongs to. As if Lily were a misplaced object rather than a person. My daughter, their flesh and blood. "She belongs to me," I said, my voice shaking. "And I belong to her." "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be," my mother sighed. "Come alone. Wear something appropriate. Be there for your brother." After hanging up, I walked to Lily's room and stood in the doorway, watching her sleep. The nightlight cast star-shaped patterns across her ceiling. The stuffed rabbit she couldn't sleep without was clutched against her chest, one ear already threadbare from constant love. I thought about the day I'd signed my divorce papers, when my mother had sat across from me in this very apartment, her hands folded perfectly in her lap. I was 7 months pregnant. "If you keep this child," she had said, "you need to understand what that means for your place in this family." At the time, I thought it was an empty threat. I was 30, a teacher with a steady job, financially independent. I wasn't a teenager making a mistake. I was a grown woman making a choice. But now, watching Lily sleep, I understood the choice had been made final. In my family's eyes, my daughter didn't exist because acknowledging her meant acknowledging my failure. Failure to maintain a proper marriage. Failure to uphold the Johnson family image. Failure to make the right choice when pregnancy followed divorce. The next day at the park, I watched Lily climb the jungle gym, her face serious with concentration. When she reached the top, she turned to me, face breaking into an enormous smile. "Look at me, Mommy. I did it all by myself." And in that moment, I knew she was not a shadow to be hidden. She was light. "Hold still, sweetie," I murmured, carefully zipping up the back of Lily's new dress. The pale pink fabric caught the morning light, making her look like she'd stepped out of a fairy tale. I'd splurged on it at Nordstrom last weekend, 3 credit card payments worth of tulle and satin and tiny pearl buttons. "Am I a princess now?" Lily twirled, the skirt flaring around her knees. "Absolutely." I adjusted the satin headband in her hair. The prettiest princess in all of Texas. We'd been practicing for the wedding all week. How to sit quietly during the ceremony. How to use the correct fork at dinner. How to say congratulations and thank you and it's nice to meet you to all the strangers who would soon surround us. I hadn't told my mother we were coming together. I hadn't responded to her follow-up calls or her text asking about my dress size for seating arrangements. Instead, I'd focused on preparing Lily and myself for what was coming. "Remember what we talked about Grandma and Grandpa?" Lily nodded solemnly, standing very still as I tied a ribbon around her ponytail. "Sometimes grown-ups are silly and forget their manners." "That's right. And what do we do when someone forgets their manners?" "We remember ours," she recited, fidgeting with the bow at her waist. We spent that afternoon in the kitchen, baking sugar cookies shaped like wedding bells. Lily insisted on decorating them with blue sprinkles, because Uncle Matthew likes blue. She'd never met her uncle. She knew him only from stories I'd told her. Carefully edited tales of the brother who had once carried me on his shoulders at the state fair, who had come to my classroom on career day when he first passed the bar exam, who had called me his best friend at his law school graduation. I hadn't told her how he'd stopped calling after I announced my pregnancy. How he'd sent a generic Christmas card signed only with his name. How he'd texted exactly once when Lily was born. Hope everything turned out okay. As we boxed up the cookies, Lily asked, "Will Uncle Matthew like me?" The question caught me off guard. I paused, a ribbon half tied around the box. "Of course he'll like you. Everyone who meets you loves you." "But he's never asked to meet me," she said, her small face serious. "Is it because I don't have a daddy?" My heart cracked. How did she pick up on these things? What had she overheard or sensed or figured out in her 5-year-old wisdom? "No, sweetie, it's because grown-ups sometimes get very busy and forget what's important." I finished tying the bow, but we're going to remind them tomorrow. That night, as I laid out our clothes for the morning, I found myself holding the invitation again, tracing my solitary name with my fingertip. I remembered another conversation with my mother, the day after I'd signed my divorce papers. "If you keep this baby," she had said, her voice low and urgent, "this family will not keep you." I'd thought it was fear talking, or shock, or old-fashioned shame that would fade once she held her granddaughter. I'd been wrong. The Lakeside Country Club gleamed in the May sunshine, its white columns and manicured gardens exactly as impressive as my mother had intended. Valets in crisp uniforms took keys from guests arriving in German cars. Women in designer dresses air-kissed each other's cheeks while men in summer suits clapped each other's shoulders. I parked my 7-year-old Honda several rows back, took a deep breath, and turned to Lily. "Ready for an adventure, princess?" She nodded eagerly, already reaching for the gift box with its blue sprinkled cookies. I'd added a check inside. Not much on a teacher's salary, but enough to show I cared. That we cared. The usher at the ceremony barely glanced at us as I gave my name, then frowned slightly at Lily. "I don't have... Is she on the list?" "She's with me," I said firmly. "My daughter." He hesitated before leading us to a seat in the very last row, directly beside an emergency exit door with a glowing red sign above it. During the ceremony, Lily was perfect, quiet and still, her eyes wide as she watched Rebecca float down the aisle in a cloud of designer white. My brother stood tall at the altar, his smile broad and unfamiliar. I searched his face for any sign that he'd seen us, any flicker of recognition, but his eyes never scanned far enough back to reach our row. The reception was worse. We were seated at table 29, the farthest from the head table, tucked beside the kitchen entrance where servers bustled in and out with trays of food and stacks of dishes. The centerpiece on our table was noticeably smaller than the others, the tablecloth slightly less pristine. "Are we at the kids' table?" Lily whispered, noticing that everyone else seated with us was staff taking short breaks between serving. "No, sweetie, this is our special table." I tried to keep my voice light. When dinner was served, I sent Lily to the children's buffet set up in the corner, watching as she carefully navigated between adults twice her height, her pink dress bright among dark suits and jewel-toned gowns. I was buttering a roll when I saw it happen. My mother, in pale blue silk, speaking to a catering manager and pointing discreetly toward the children's buffet. The manager nodded, then approached Lily, who was reaching for a miniature quiche. By the time I reached them, Lily's lower lip was trembling. "Is there a problem?" I asked, placing my hand protectively on Lily's shoulder. The manager smiled apologetically. The children's buffet is for wedding party family members only. House policy. She is family. She's the groom's niece. I'm sorry, ma'am. I was specifically told. He stopped himself. Told what? I pressed. That there must be some mistake. He glanced over my shoulder, and I turned to see my mother had conveniently disappeared. I knelt down to Lily's level. Let's go back to our table, sweetie. I'll fix you a plate from the grown-up buffet. As we walked back, a woman in an expensive-looking navy dress stopped me with a perfectly manicured hand on my arm. Excuse me, which company are you with? The catering or the event planning? I stared at her, momentarily confused. I'm sorry? You work the event, right? I wanted to pass along a compliment about the hors d'oeuvres. My cheeks burned as I realized what was happening. In my simple dress, the nicest I could afford but clearly not designer, with a child in tow at a table by the kitchen, I had been mistaken for the help. I'm the groom's sister, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The woman's eyes widened in embarrassment. Oh, I'm so sorry. I just assumed. It's fine, I said, though it wasn't. Nothing about this day was fine. As the woman hurried away, I caught sight of my father, standing nearby, close enough to have overheard the entire exchange. Our eyes met briefly before he turned away, pretending to be engrossed in conversation with a man I recognized as one of his golf partners. Back at our table, I cut my chicken into tiny pieces for Lily, who had gone quiet in the way children do when they sense something is wrong but don't understand what. Over her head, I could see the head table where my brother sat with his bride, my parents, and the Porter family, all laughing beneath crystal chandeliers. 5 tables away, yet worlds apart. I don't know exactly when something inside me snapped. Perhaps it was watching Lily carefully eating her dinner with perfect manners while being treated as invisible. Perhaps it was seeing my mother introduce distant cousins to the Porters while pretending we didn't exist. Perhaps it was the moment the wedding photographer gathered all family members for photos and deliberately avoided our corner. When the toasts began, I found myself standing. My hand closed around my wine glass, half full of mediocre Chardonnay. The room was spinning slightly. Or maybe that was just my resolve finally breaking free from 3 decades of careful restraint. I walked toward the center of the room, Lily's small hand in mine. Conversations quieted as people noticed us moving. By the time we reached the gap between the tables, a strange hush had fallen. My brother saw me then, his smile faltering. My mother half rose from her seat, alarm flashing across her perfect features. Too late. I'd like to make a toast, I said, my voice carrying in the sudden silence. To family. The word hung in the air like a challenge. My name is Claire Johnson. I used to be the groom's sister. I used to be Edward and Eleanor Johnson's daughter. I lifted my glass higher. But today, I'm a stranger. Because 5 years ago, I chose to become a mother at the wrong time, in the wrong way. Lily pressed against my leg, confused by the sudden attention. I put my hand on her shoulder, drawing strength from her presence. My daughter wasn't invited here today. Her name wasn't on the invitation. We were seated by the kitchen exit. She was turned away from the children's buffet because she isn't considered family. The silence in the room had taken on a horrified quality. Someone coughed. A phone camera clicked. 5 years ago, I stood in a hospital room holding my 2-day-old daughter, who weighed less than 5 pounds. My phone rang. It wasn't my mother calling to ask about her first grandchild. It was my mother asking if I had taken care of the embarrassment yet. My father stood now too, his face thunderous. Claire, that's enough. No, Dad, it isn't. My voice didn't even sound like my own anymore. You told me if I kept this child, I couldn't remain a Johnson. You said I had to choose. I looked down at Lily, who was watching me with wide, confused eyes. So I chose. I chose her, and I would choose her again every single day for the rest of my life. My mother had reached my brother now, her hand on his arm, whispering urgently. The bride sat frozen, her perfect makeup unable to hide her shock. I raised my glass one more time. To Matthew and Rebecca, may your marriage be blessed with children you're not ashamed to claim. I set the untouched wine down on the nearest table and turned to leave. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared at their plates. Someone at the back of the room stood up. My Aunt Sarah, my mother's younger sister, who had secretly sent me money during my first year as a single mother. She crossed the room and embraced me tightly, whispering, "I'm proud of you," before turning to kneel before Lily. "Hello, sweetheart. I'm your great Aunt Sarah. I've waited a very long time to meet you." Lily, ever polite, extended her small hand. "It's nice to meet you. I like your necklace." As we walked out, other relatives rose, second cousins, a great-uncle, my father's sister, moving toward us with uncertain smiles and whispered apologies. My parents remained at the head table, my mother rigid with fury, my father ashen-faced. Matthew stood halfway between, caught between worlds, unable to step in either direction. We made it to the parking lot before the tears came. Not mine. I was beyond crying. But Lily's. "Did I do something wrong, Mommy? Is that why everyone was looking at us?" I knelt on the asphalt, heedless of my dress, and took her small face in my hands. "No, baby. You did absolutely nothing wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, big ones, and they're too proud to fix them." "But they're your mommy and daddy," she said, confusion in her voice. "Why don't they love us?" The question hit me like a physical blow. How do you explain generational shame to a 5-year-old? How do you tell a child that her very existence threatens a carefully constructed facade? "They forgot how to love properly," I said finally. "Some people only know how to love when everything is perfect." We were about to get into the car when I heard footsteps behind us. I turned to find Aunt Sarah and 3 other relatives approaching. "Claire, wait!" Sarah called. She reached us, slightly out of breath. "What you did in there, it needed to be said." Uncle Robert, my father's older brother, nodded gravely. "Your grandmother, your father's mother, would be ashamed of how they've treated you both." My cousin Melissa knelt to Lily's level. "We've seen your pictures on Facebook. I have a daughter about your age. Maybe you two could have a play date sometime?" The simple gesture, acknowledgement of my child as a person worthy of friendship, made my throat tighten. "We didn't know," Uncle Robert continued. "We were told you wanted distance, that you'd chosen to step back from family events." "That's not," I began, but Sarah interrupted. "We suspected, Claire. We should have reached out directly. I'm sorry we didn't." As we stood there in the parking lot, more relatives emerged from the reception. Not everyone, not even most, but enough. Enough to form a small circle around us, to shake Lily's hand and admire her dress, to exchange phone numbers and make tentative plans. My aunt explained in hushed tones how my parents had controlled the narrative, limiting access to me, explaining away my absences with careful lies. How Matthew had gone along with it, first out of confusion, then out of habit. "Your mother threatened to cut anyone who defied her out of the will," Uncle Robert said bluntly. "For some, that was enough to keep quiet." "I don't care about the money," I said. "Neither do we," Sarah replied, gesturing to those who had followed her outside. "Not anymore." As our impromptu gathering continued, I noticed movement near the entrance. Matthew stood there, watching us, his expression unreadable from this distance. After a moment, he turned and went back inside. We were nearly home when my phone rang. Matthew's name flashed on the screen. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and answered, putting the call on speaker, a habit from years of solo parenting, never having private conversations when Lily was present. "Claire?" His voice sounded strange, strained. "Where are you?" "Heading home." A long pause. "What you said back there, was it true?" I finished for him. "I didn't know they'd treat you like that at the wedding. The seating, the buffet. I had no idea." I glanced in the rearview mirror. Lily had fallen asleep, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. The satin headband slipped down over one eyebrow. "But you knew I wasn't supposed to bring her. You knew her name wasn't on the invitation." Another silence, this one damning. "I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere," he finally said. "That it was Mom and Dad's decision." "You were my best friend once," I said quietly. "Remember when you got caught skipping school in 10th grade? Who did you call to cover for you?" "You." "And when you failed the bar exam the first time, who did you tell before anyone else?" "You." His voice was barely audible now. "You called me your hero in your law school graduation speech. Said I was the strongest person you knew." Through the phone, I heard the sounds of the reception continuing. Music, laughter, clinking glasses. Life going on as if nothing had happened. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I should have stood up for you. For both of you." "Yes," I agreed. "You should have." Would it be okay if I met her properly? Maybe next week?" I looked again at my sleeping daughter, at the tiny pearl buttons down the back of her dress, at the scuff on her patent leather shoe where she'd dragged her foot nervously under the reception table. "I'll think about it," I said, echoing my response to my mother weeks earlier. But this time, I meant it. The apartment was quiet when we arrived home. I carried Lily inside. She barely stirred as I removed her fancy dress and gently pulled her favorite unicorn pajamas over her head. The stuffed rabbit was tucked under her arm, its one floppy ear gripped tightly in her sleeping fingers. I sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, watching her breathe. The string lights we'd hung around her window cast soft stars across her ceiling, our own private constellation. "You saved me," I whispered, though she couldn't hear. Not the other way around. And it was true. Before Lily, I had spent 30 years contorting myself to fit into the Johnson family mold. Perfect grades, sensible career, appropriate boyfriend turned appropriate husband. I had swallowed criticism and accepted conditional love as if it were normal. I had believed I needed their approval to be whole. Then came divorce and pregnancy and a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. In my parents' eyes, I had ruined everything. In reality, I had finally found myself. My phone buzzed with messages from Aunt Sarah, from cousins, from relatives expressing solidarity or curiosity or simply connection. Not from my parents. Probably never again from my parents. I was surprised to realize the thought didn't devastate me anymore. In the coming days, there would be decisions to make about Matthew's tentative olive branch, about which family relationships to nurture and which to let go, about how much to explain to Lily as she grew older. But tonight, watching my daughter sleep peacefully after a day that had changed everything, I felt something unexpected. Freedom. The Johnson family had a reputation to uphold, an image to maintain, appearances to keep polished. Without that burden, what might we become? This little family of two? Anything we wanted. I leaned down and kissed Lily's forehead. "The little girl they wouldn't claim today is the one who set me free," I whispered. "And from now on, we make our own family. We write our own story." Outside, a spring thunderstorm was brewing, lightning occasionally illuminating the room. But here, in this small apartment with mismatched furniture and crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator and 1,000 tiny evidences of love, we were home. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.